Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast. That's Andrew Ellis. I am, as I already said, Jeremy Birmingham. So it is Talking Stuff. Andrew, it's been a productive weekend for Ohio State. Clearly, the Buckeyes had some issues to address in the transfer portal. There's obviously going to be some other issues that people are going to ask about in the transfer portal as far as how the Buckeyes get the numbers. But let's just start with Saturday's first bit of news, which was the addition of Jordan Lyle. And then we'll, work our way into the transfer portal news that happened on Saturday night with Lorenzo Styles, the addition of Joshua Simmons on Sunday afternoon, the questions about Tywone Malone, and a lot of other stuff, as we'll get into in this episode. But first and foremost, Jordan Lyle, I wanted to talk about this. Ohio State running back commitment number 2.5, I guess, when you add him to James Peoples, the San Antonio four-star, and Samuel Williams-Dixon from Pickerington North. As I said, when Sam committed, there is a lot of discussion around Ohio State that he could potentially play defense down the road for the Buckeyes. So they're not really viewing him as a pure running back. They are talking athlete. Maybe that's in the slot. Maybe that's a running back. Maybe that's in defensive backfield. That's how they're really working this angle to say, hey, we need three guys that can carry the ball in this class. Did not sign one in the class of 2023. Looking ahead, you figure you're going to lose Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, maybe Chip Trainum, maybe Evan Pryor. You don't know how this goes. Dallin Hayden is the only player in the current running back room that for sure has eligibility after this season. So it is a need to find three, and they've got it now with the addition of Jordan Lyle, who, if you watch his tape, my opinion is, and I know I normally try to find like Ohio State comparisons for guys that commit, but I see Jahmyr Gibbs in the tape of Jordan Lyle. Maybe not quite the same burst, maybe not like top end speed yet, but when you're playing at St. Thomas Aquinas in South Florida, you're playing at one of the best high schools in the country, averaging over almost 10.5 yards a carry as a junior. That's pretty good. And I know his ranking is a little bit weird on three. One of the recruiting networks has him as the number 5 ranked running back in the country. Everywhere else has him in the 30s. I don't think that it really matters where he is on the rankings, because clearly Ohio State valued him pretty high to take him when they did, knowing that they just hosted Taylor Tatum last week and felt like they were in a bit of a position to make a move for Tatum if they wanted to be patient. But, obviously they weren't ready to do that.
Yeah, I think heading into the weekend, we thought it was going to be just a big, portal watch weekend. And then, the news starts to come out on Saturday that something's going down. I mean, it's a big get. Like you said, they needed at least 2 tailbacks in this class, and now you're kind of sitting at 2.5. I kind of thought this was going to be – I thought Tony Alford was going to kind of play the long game with this. I think realistically they were probably running third at best for Tatum behind USC and Michigan. But getting this guy in the fold now is great. Obviously, it's a Florida kid, so you're going to have to continue recruiting him until December. But no, it was a big get for Tony Alford, and now it looks like his job is pretty much done besides keeping these guys in the fold.
Yeah, I know that people are going to look at it, and as you just brought up the Florida thing, like that is a concern always when you're recruiting South Florida. St. Thomas Aquinas is a slightly different situation. Obviously people are a little bit burned still from the Mark Fletcher thing at American Heritage. But, Brandon Ennis was at Heritage and had no problem, sticking to his word. Ohio State is recruiting Byron Lewis, a 2025 running back from that high school. So it's not like they're afraid to go back to that well. But there is at least some belief with a kid like Jordan Lyle that this is a secure situation right now. It's not ever going to be easy when you're dealing against Alabama or Georgia. I mean, all these teams offered him. So that is in itself telling as far as where he's viewed nationally by college coaches. And you can believe this or not, talking to people around the Ohio State program, I was told that they valued and had Lyle on their own personal board higher than they had Taylor Tatum. And that's why when the opportunity came to take this commitment now, they weren't going to risk it by saying, let's wait. And that, I think, is just Tony Alford learning a lesson. That's after 2020 with the Bijan Robinson thing and Jalen Knighton with whatever happened with Mark Fletcher last year. Like, you are not in a position right now at Ohio State or anywhere around the country because of the portal, because of NIL, where you can just wait and bide your time and say, well, you know what, maybe we'll just try to get a player who's got a little bit higher national ranking. Like, if you like a dude well enough to offer him, you had him up on campus. If you're in that position and he says, I want in, then you need to say, okay. And at that point, you have to just be confident with what you are evaluating and what you've got in your class. And with Peoples, with Lyle, and with Samuel Williams-Dixon, that's a very versatile, very like complete running back group for Tony Alford. And as you mentioned, now it's about maintaining and then looking ahead to 25 and sorting out the big national fish in that class, because there are a handful of them that Ohio State's already in on. Offered another one on Sunday. There, and then you have 2 offers in the state with Bo Jackson and Marquise Davis. So that is going to be another interesting class for Tony Alford. But it's a pretty big cycle for him to bounce back after the way that he was hammered, I guess, in the Mark Fletcher recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, he gets hammered sometimes, but, he has like these classes that are, legendary, like the Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor class. And then there's some misses like we had last cycle. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they can't afford to be left at the altar again here in come December and scrambling last minute before the early signing period. So getting both of these guys in the fold now, plus Sam Williams-Dixon, that's big. And now you just got to keep recruiting them. So here we are.
Yeah, and I know people will probably wonder, like, oh, how do Sam and James feel about that? According to people I talked to at Ohio State, those two were the ones that were pushing and reaching out to Jordan and trying to get him to make this decision now. So there was no animosity or any sort of, reluctance or pushback from the current commitments when this news broke. So it happened really. I mean, I got told about it on Friday morning and said, hey, by the way, this is probably going to happen this weekend. He just dropped his top 5, like, a week ago. And all the conversation around it then was, oh, he's not in any hurry. And here we are 5 days later. And decision made. So that's the way it is. But again, you're going to look at the rankings. That's fine. I understand it. That's what, it is obviously subjective, but it is something that's important. But if you view it from the lens of some people have him at number 5, some people have him at number 40, then you figure you have now 2 top 20 running backs in the country in this class and a very good athlete in Sam Williams-Dixon. And just as a reminder, Dallin Hayden, who Ohio State fans were not really excited about when he committed, when they should have been, has turned out to be pretty good. And he was a throwaway in that class of 2022 to a lot of people. So it is what it is. Speaking of is what it is, on Saturday night, 5 minutes after Jordan Lyle makes his announcement, Lorenzo Styles Jr., in a very understated way, announced that he had committed to Ohio State. He puts out a tweet and says, thankful for the opportunity. Let's get to work. And Austin and I were in the car getting ready to drive back from St. Louis, where we were spending the draft weekend at Cam Brown's house. And we're like, is that a commitment? Did he just commit, or is he just posting a picture? And it was a commitment. So not exactly a surprise. Once we saw Lorenzo Styles enter the transfer portal earlier this week, it became sort of clear cut, I think, that where he was going to end up at Ohio State. The question is going to be why? What exactly is he going to do at Ohio State? He is playing cornerback, which he decided to start playing at Notre Dame, a month ago. It is a weird situation. There's some conversation that maybe this season he won't be on scholarship for Ohio State. I have not got that confirmed yet, but I think that that's accurate. And if that's the case, then you really don't lose much if you're the Buckeyes here by bringing him on board and letting him develop. And plus, his family's great. It helps Sonny. It helps the entire locker room. He's the type of kid you want in your locker room. But you can see it from the other perspective, too, and be like, oh, that's weird because nobody's leaving, so why do you need another corner?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that as a wide receiver in high school, it's hard to get into Ohio State's class. So back when they were recruiting Styles, we talked a lot about, viewing him as a defensive back. Notre Dame obviously brought him in as a wide receiver. Very first play against Ohio State, he catches that pass, scrambles down, almost takes it to the house. But I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you got to kind of view this as a long-term move, because is he going to come in right now as a defensive back and, overtake Burke or Hancock or Igbinosin or any of those guys? No. But can he maybe give you some special teams abilities his first year, and then as he learns more about the position, possibly make an impact at cornerback down the road? I think that's definitely in the cards. So I don't think he was the most important of the 3 portal visitors this week, but I mean, nobody's going to complain about having another Styles in Columbus. So
yeah, and he can help in the return game. That's one area. You mentioned special teams. I mean, he can help on coverage, but he can also help in the return game. That is something he did at Notre Dame. And you're building a program where you want kids that are good fits for the team. And I know people don't always love to hear that, but Lorenzo Styles is. His dad obviously played at Ohio State. Sonny is now there. And if he's there, not on scholarship, and again, we're working to get that confirmed, then it answers, or at least answers part of the question for Ohio State about what to do. And now you just have the opportunity to develop a kid, 6'1", almost 6'2", 200 pounds, really good athlete. He can run. Ohio State did recruit him out of high school and wanted him as a defensive back. If there's any recruits watching this show, Andrew, I beg you to help me express to them that if a college football coach who gets paid a butt ton of money to win football games tells you in high school that they may believe your best position is somewhere other than what you're currently playing, just listen to them. You know, they're doing it for your own good. They're not doing it because they're, wanting to just toy with your future. They're doing it for your own good. These guys get paid a lot of money to evaluate and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you're pretty good at wide receiver in high school, but you might be better as a cornerback down the road. Think about your favorite, your namesake, Ted Ginn Jr., who was obviously, he was the number 1 ranked cornerback in the country coming out of high school. And Ohio State said, you know what? You're probably going to be a better wide receiver. It turned out okay, right? Like, just trust. Just trust. Timper says if he wasn't a legacy, we wouldn't have offered. I don't entirely disagree with that, Timper. I think that's probably fair. But again, because I don't believe it's going to be costing Ohio State a scholarship this year, I think it makes that a lot easier to deal with. One player that will cost Ohio State a scholarship, who announced his commitment to Ohio State on Sunday, is Joshua Simmons, 6'6", 305-pound offensive lineman, offensive tackle from San Diego State, originally from Helix High School in San Diego. Big old kid, man. Like, you look at that kid, and that is what you need for Ohio State. It is a desperate situation at offensive line. And finding someone who you believe can be a starter, whether at right tackle or left tackle, that's not going to be decided yet, is absolutely huge right now, because he was clear-cut the best offensive lineman in the portal, according to the Ohio State staff. And they felt very confident that if they could get him on campus one time, because of the long-term or existing relationship that he had with Justin Fry, because Fry recruited him out of San Diego when Justin was the offensive line coach at UCLA, like, he was in town for 48 hours, left, committed to Ohio State, who actually made his announcement on Twitter when he was in a layover on his flight because he didn't want to wait until Sunday night. He was talking originally about doing that this evening at like 10 o'clock Eastern time, and decided he'd get more people to see it if he did it on a layover. So he's a smart kid because he's thinking about the media, and I appreciate that. So good job, Josh. And Andrew, I don't know if you watched the tape. Bill did a breakdown at ohiostate.rivals.com as far as the upside there, but what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, my thoughts are, if you're going to pluck any position from the portal, I mean, this was going to be the one. So of the weekend portal visitors, this was far and away the most important of the three. I don't know if he projects to stay at right tackle or if they might try to flip-flop Josh Fry around. They got plenty of time to figure that whole situation out, and I trust anything Bill Landis says about offensive linemen. But this is a young guy. He's got tackle size. Oklahoma wanted him. Florida, he was supposed to visit Florida next week. That's why I was glad to see this pop today, because if you start to get to the middle of the week and there's that chance he might make it to Gainesville, that's when you start to get a little worried. But no, this is exactly what they needed in the portal, whether he's going to start right away or whether he's going to be a depth piece. I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah, I don't think you bring in a kid like this unless you are confident he can be a starter. But there is no guarantee that he will be a starter. The question, I think, ultimately, is he a right tackle or a left tackle? And you watch Josh Fryer at times this spring look a little bit out of place at left tackle. Other times he looked really good. I've talked to people this last week about Josh Fryer and the way that he was handling JT Tuimoloau in practice. And there was a lot of people who were pleasantly surprised at what Josh Fryer was able to do athletically. And I think that there's a very good chance he stays at left tackle, but he may be a more natural right tackle, where if you look at Simmons, he looks more like your prototypical left tackle, the longer arms, etc. I honestly think Ohio State is in a position where they're going to let Josh Simmons, and I think he'll arrive on campus officially in the early part of June, end of May. Once he gets there, then you sort of start to figure this out. But the big thing for them was just, as you said, knocking this out of the park this weekend, making sure he did not take that visit to Florida, making sure he didn't take a visit anywhere else. And now that's done and over with. And it is a pretty big win for Justin Fry and the Buckeyes. It is a much different situation than, say, the Vic Cutler transfer in January, where that was purely a depth chart piece where you had a guy who can play 5 positions and you wanted to just shore up the total depth of the line. Josh Simmons is a guy that they are going to count on to play early, play often, and it may only be 1 year if he does what they think he can do athletically, because he certainly has the upside to make that happen. But you like to see it if you're Ohio State, because that is the type of move you have to do in the transfer portal in the year 2023. You know what move you don't have to make, Andrew?
What's that?
Is it a defensive tackle who wasn't sure if he wanted to play baseball or football coming out of high school. That said, if he wants to play football, Tywan Malone, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss in the transfer portal, is a pretty good choice to do it. He's huge, 6'4", 300 pounds, great athlete. Visited this weekend. My personal vibe on that one is that it's not going to happen for Ohio State. I'm not saying it's over. There was a moment in the Davison Igbinosun recruitment that kind of felt similar, where Ohio State was like, I don't know if this is going to pan out the way people want. I don't get the sense that this is the same situation, primarily because cornerback was a much more pressing need than defensive tackle is right now. Defensive tackle, you're looking at depth. If you can bring in somebody that has 2 or 3 years and that you're going to get 2 or 3 years out of them, then I can see it being more of an issue. But I don't know that with a player like Malone, who would be eligible for the draft after this year, if he wanted to be, his freaky athleticism, anything can really happen, I guess. But I just don't think that one's going to happen for Ohio State, much to the chagrin, I think, of people watching and listening. But to me, that one seems as though it's likely to go a different direction.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And this is a kid I really liked, following him as a recruit a few years back. I don't think he's made a huge impact at Ole Miss so far. Obviously, he's still young, though.
12 tackles in 2 years.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not like they're missing out on, like Dan Wilkinson or somebody like that. But I don't know. I mean, it just would have been a depth piece. And it's never bad to have depth on the interior part of the defensive line. But this isn't some huge blow in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing Ohio State is looking at or looking for are those defensive tackles that are just a little bit bigger. You see the Hero Canoe, Devon Hamilton, who is probably one of the more underrated players in the last decade in my mind at Ohio State, who just signed a pretty large NFL contract, his second contract. Like, that's the prototype. They're looking for that 6'4", 305, 310 pound defensive tackle. And that's what you get out of Hero Canoe. That's what you're hoping, that's what you hoped you were going to get out of Jaden McKenzie, who's still on the roster. Ty Hamilton is moving up into that, body size now, that body style. I think that's why you're interested in a guy like Malone, because the physical abilities are there, but he's never been particularly interested in just diving into football. And maybe he is now, I don't know, but I don't think it's going to beat Ohio State. So I don't want to completely dismiss it and say don't pay any attention to it, but I'd be pretty surprised at this point with that.
Yeah.
But Ohio State is going to probably still have some transfer activity in the next couple days. Buckeyes are a scholarship or 2 over. I don't really know. And I want to be very clear about something, folks. Who cares how many numbers they have? They're going to get to 85 by August 1st. That is all that matters. So don't worry about the number. Like, it does not really matter at all. They will get there. The players that end up leaving the program will be players that have contributed very little. That's unfortunately the way it goes. This is the new world of college football. I find it somewhat comical that a good portion of folks want Ohio State to be as aggressive as they can, chasing every transfer, going after every player that they can, going after every recruit, sign 25, sign 28, sign 30 if you can. Who cares? And then every time a transfer gets added to the roster, the question is, well, how are they going to do this? How do they, like, it's going to work out. And I don't, it's not fun. I don't like the roster management era we're in, but this is college football now. And I guarantee you Alabama and Georgia are not worried about how many guys they have on scholarship right now. And Ohio State fans shouldn't be either.
Yeah, I stopped worrying about that a long time ago. Whether it's medical situations or gray shirts, walk-ons, whatever, it just always works itself out. So I would caution people to just not freak out about that at all.
Yeah, it's going to work out. Obviously, if you look at the Ohio State roster, there are some spots where you can see depth pieces that maybe there's too many players at position A or position B. Today is the final day for guys to enter the portal and be eligible to play immediately this season. So from talking to people around the Ohio State program on Saturday night, there was a lot of like, oh, we're all good. Nobody's leaving. I don't think that's going to be entirely the case. Sunday will certainly bring some last minute decisions. But again, I think it's something that you just have to expect. And this is college football now. You know what? Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and wish those guys the best. Like if somebody does move on and think the grass is greener somewhere else, I mean, whether it's a Jameson Williams situation or whether it's somebody going to Duke or wherever else, I mean, just let them make their move. There's no reason for like butthurtedness and sour grapes and all that stuff. So,
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got to figure out their way. And it is interesting to watch the Ohio State roster. And this is something I wanted to actually talk about on this episode. Maybe not right now, because I know people want to talk about other stuff like Aaron Scott, for example. But it is interesting to me to watch this draft over the weekend and to see Ohio State at 7 draft-eligible defensive players. Only 1 get drafted. And you have to wonder if at some point the Buckeyes need to adjust their mindset as far as – I'm going to go back to 2015, okay? Because that to me is like the most talented Ohio State team of all time. And they looked totally disjointed and looked like a bunch of guys who were interested in things other than playing football for Ohio State, or at least not fully committing to football and had their minds on the NFL or whatever. I really think it's time around college football. I think the best teams generally are going to be the ones that rely heavily on freshmen and sophomores to win national championships. Am I wrong? Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think you're spot on.
Because by the time these guys get to their 3rd and 4th years, I just think they're all checked out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. I'm not quite as concerned about the defensive draft stuff as you are. Like a guy like Teron Vincent, obviously it's not great to see a 5-star not get drafted. Ronnie Hickman didn't get drafted, but I think that next wave is going to be coming. And, a year from now when guys like JT Tuimoloau, probably Jack Sawyer and Denzel Burke and those types of guys are out there. So it's never good to have like an off year. But if we're having the same conversation next year about the 2024 crop, then I think we're in problem area.
Yeah, but the problem is that if you look at the roster and you think about JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Mike Hall and even guys on the periphery like Tyleik Williams or Jordan Hancock or Denzel Burke, who's behind them? That's the issue Ohio State's run into in the last few years with the defensive recruiting. And I think that's why people get so kind of on edge about like, okay, that's great. Another commitment from a running back. Awesome. The wide receiver recruiting is great. Quarterback recruiting is great. When are these defensive players going to get on board? When are defensive players going to say, hey, you know what? I can still get to the NFL from Ohio State? Because there was a moment a few years ago when it's like, if you play defense at Ohio State and you start, you're going to be drafted and you don't have to worry about it. And it just has been a real struggle the last few years. Some of that I think is because Ohio State's had 5 defensive coordinators in the last 6 years. That's a problem for sure. Multiple defensive back coaches, multiple linebacker coaches. I think that, as Ryan Day's trying to figure out like who the right pieces are, the right staff alignment. I do think that there's a question to be had about, has defensive recruiting been a victim of that uncertainty in the coaching realm? And certainly there's an expectation heading into this next season that Tuimoloau, Mike Hall, those guys are going to be not just drafted, but I would expect if JT and Mike Hall are not 1st-round picks next year, I'll be shocked. But you still have other players behind them that you're like, I don't know if those guys have had enough of an opportunity to do their thing and be ready to go. If you look back to 2014, it's Joey Bosa as a sophomore, it's Zeke as a sophomore, it's a lot of big-time contributors as a sophomore, and I feel like Ohio State may need to open up that door a little bit, because that's what recruits are looking for. They're seeing, hey, if I can go play early at Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, that's where I'm going to go. And so depth charts are scary to kids, but if you know that you're going to get on the field if you're one of the best players regardless, then it makes it easier. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but we've seen some of that of late too. I mean, Denzel Burke started from day one, and obviously he kind of took his lumps as a 2nd-year player, but he's looking to rebound now as a junior. But I don't know. Sometimes it's hard just to find like where those where those guys can fit, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like who's the defensive guys coming in this year for 2023 and where they might make an impact early on. And if you think of like Calvin Simpson-Hunt or Jermaine Matthews, two stud corners that we both love and the Ohio State staff loves, it's not going to be easy for them to make are they going to see much playing time this year, do you think?
Well, yeah, that's why you look at the 23 recruiting class, and again, like not hitting on the defensive ends was a huge problem. Not landing a player like Caleb Downs, which was always going to be a tall task, not doing it meant he doesn't have the safeties are not going to have an opportunity to play early. Malik Hartford's done a great job and has lost his black stripe. Jaden Bonsu's not on campus yet. Cedric Hawkins isn't on campus yet. Those guys aren't going to be ready to play this year, and there's 10 safeties, so they don't need to. Defensive tackle Caden McDonald and Jason Moore, maybe you see those guys get an opportunity. We're talking about a guy like Tywan Malone and why he'd be important for Ohio State, but I guess that's the point to me. If you have Caden McDonald coming in and you believe that he's the type of player who's going to be able to contribute at Ohio State, which is why you recruit him, it makes more sense to just put him in the game rather than putting a player like Tywan Malone, who has 12 tackles in 2 years at Ole Miss. Like, I'd rather just play the guy that you recruited, but that's a tangent that maybe is for another day. Let's talk about what everyone wants to talk. Okay. Andrew, the people are worried that the Aaron Scott situation is devolving and turning into another Jordan Marshall situation. And I know you actually are one of those people. So let's absorb it from your point of view first and just attack it from there. Why are you so worried?
You're trying to have a therapy session with me here?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Why are you so sad?
I don't think I'm really worried. Like, I don't, if you were to ask me right now where he's going to end up, I would say that he's going to end up at Ohio State. But there does seem to be some ominous vibes. Maybe it's people like myself reading too much into Twitter activity and social media activity and stuff like that, which I admittedly am prone to do. But I don't know. He's somebody that I expected to be in the class a while ago, and it hasn't happened. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen for at least another month or 2 months. So I don't know. It's just this recruitment isn't really where I thought it would be right now. And that's kind of the reason for my concern. And Michigan's making things interesting. He was just at Oregon. I've heard some scuttlebutt on the Michigan side thinking that Oregon is their top competition. Do I agree with that? No. But I don't know. It's just not gone. It has not gone the way that I thought it would go.
So let me ask you this. Oh, I just had a Peter Brady moment. That was wild. I haven't had one of those in a long time. Why did you think he would have been in the class a while ago? Because has he ever said it, or has the plan always been to commit in the summer?
No, he's not said it. It's just really my own state of mind. Like, I've looked at him and Bryce West kind of in this same grouping, and I've thought, Bryce West is a Glenville kid. They play things differently. They draw attention to their class or their teammates, and they wait to decide. Aaron Scott, another kid, not a Glenville kid. I just thought he was going to be on board sooner. And then we'd wait for Bryce West. And we talked about this before, but I think it's flip-flopped. I think Bryce West will probably be in relatively soon, and we're just going to have to wait a couple more months for Mr. Scott to make his decision.
Yeah. And I don't want to dismiss the concern. Okay. Part of your, I think, a panic, I don't want to use that word, in the last week was that after I saw Aaron Scott at the Rivals camp in Cincinnati a week ago, I said, I felt like something was a little off. It didn't seem to me that he was in the same place that I thought he would be, based on previous conversations with him. That said, he also raved about his relationship with Tim Walton, his relationship with Ryan Day, who he said he had the best relationship with of any head coach. That said, there's also a legitimate concern on his end. Now, I say legitimate in that it is his concern. Whether or not it should be is up for interpretation. It's certainly something that he's being, I would imagine, told by other coaching staffs as they do their jobs, that there's a depth chart issue at Ohio State, that there's going to be too many guys in front of him. That, of course, is suggesting that Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock and Davis Enigmanos and all these guys will be back next year, and that he's not have a tough time getting on the field. Why would he waste his time going to Ohio State? I don't think that is altogether unfair to put into the kid's head. If you're Michigan or Oregon, that's smart. I've seen the comments about his high school coach, Mo Douglas, being a Michigan fan. Like, I don't think that's true. I know that Coach Douglas is a guy who's been around for a long time, very well respected. He's the former coach at Trotwood Madison, where Ohio State passed up on a couple players back in the early 2010s that I think rubbed him the wrong way, including Mike McRae, a former Ohio State, an Ohio State legacy, and who ended up going to Michigan and being a captain. So he's got a good relationship with Wolverine staff. He does not have a poor relationship with the Ohio State staff. So I want to clarify that right off the bat. That being the case, Ohio State is not like worried, from what I can understand, about Aaron Scott, but they know that they have to keep recruiting him. This is not a done deal. It's never been a done deal. And I hate to say it because it'll go back to the nightmares people had last November and December. But when you're dealing with a top 100 player, no matter where he's from nowadays, in recruiting environment, the game has changed in a way that you cannot just quantify easily. Like, when there is no loyalty for Ohio kids to Ohio State anymore. There's no loyalty to Georgia kids to Georgia. There's no loyal kids to Florida, Miami, or Florida State. They're going to find the best situation for them, and that situation is going to be about playing time, NIL, and the opportunity to get to the NFL. So as you step back and look at the Aaron Scott recruitment right now, obviously NIL, Ohio State seems to have somewhat figured that out. They are not on the same level as Oregon and will not be, so don't expect them to be, because they're not going to play it the same way that Oregon is playing it. When you look at the depth chart, it's a question. It's a fair question to ask, because Ohio State does have Jair Brown and Ryan Turner and Calvin Simpson-Hunt and Jermaine Matthews, and now you add in Lorenzo Styles, even though he's a non-scholarship player potentially at this point. You have Davis Igbinosun, who's only in his second year, so he should be required to return to Ohio State next year. You can see why at least he would be having that in his head, I think. And then on the third point, you talk about NFL development, and you'd have to wonder, because it seems like it's been quite a while since Ohio State's had a defensive back drafted. Michigan is putting out players into the first and second rounds in the last couple of years in the defensive backfield. Is that being pushed into his brain? I'd assume that it is. So none of these things on their face are like wrong, but at the same time, he still is a kid from Ohio who loves Ohio State. He understands the value of an Ohio State career and for the rest of his life. And so there's a lot of things to figure out. And I don't think it's as easy as people believe it should be, or as like it used to be. But this isn't the way things used to be. So how can things be the same?
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned your article, because I think that is part of what sent the panic permeating throughout the fan base a little bit. I don't know. I think, like, is Ohio State's cornerback depth chart really that much different from any other schools? I mean,
probably not.
And I know any program is going to use whatever they can to negative recruit. I mean, Larry Johnson was going to retire like 10 years ago, according to every other school that's recruiting against Ohio State for defensive linemen. But I don't know. And maybe he's had this June-ish summer commitment timeline on his brain the entire time, which I think maybe he has. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I do have a point that I want to make before we turn off of the Aaron Scott thing, but you finish what you're saying and then I'll get to it.
Well, no, I was going to ask you actually to explain why, if there are people out there, Ohio State fans, comparing this to the Jordan Marshall recruitment, I was just going to have you tell them why they should not be. Besides the obvious that these are two very different players.
They're two very different people, two very different players at a very different situation recruiting wise. Ohio State was late on Jordan Marshall, period, point blank. They were late. And by the time they got into it, which normally it's fine to get in late if you're Ohio State on an in-state prospect, Mike Hart had built up too much of a lead, period. Michigan did not back off. In previous years, when Michigan didn't have the momentum that they have in the game against Ohio State, they may have backed off, said, hey, it's not going to be worth it's not going to be worth the poll, but now it is. Aaron Scott is similar in that situation. I can understand where people are like, hey, Aaron Scott is waiting to decide until the summer, but who cares? Jordan Marshall said he was going to wait till July 9th and then committed a week later. I understand all that. They're just different players. They're different people. I do think it's fascinating that the idea a player can be negative recruited, and I don't like to even say negative recruiting because it's just recruiting. How do you tell a player that Ohio State's depth chart is too vast, but yet on the same token likely tell them they don't have any good players there and they don't get drafted? So like it's a weird thing to try to sell both angles. Like, well, they have too many players and they're all pretty bad. Like that should be a win for Ohio State. So we'll see. I know that the relationship with Tim Walton is very strong. The relationship with Ryan Day is very strong. The relationship with Ohio State recruits is strong. It's going to be a battle. And this is unfortunately just what you have to expect now around the country when it comes to recruiting. Again, I'm going to go back as much as I can to Justice Haynes, the Georgia legacy, 5-star running back, Georgia's backyard, who went to Alabama. Like that's crazy. It's crazy. He went to Alabama with another 5-star running back. Like I don't know why anyone should expect that Ohio State will have an easier time recruiting in Ohio than Georgia has in Georgia. Now, Georgia does have an advantage, of course, in that they have 7,000 Division I recruits in their state, and if you miss one, who cares? You'll just go get someone else. But Ohio State is also still very involved in the recruitment of a guy like Xavier Brown, for example, very involved in the recruitment of Charles Lester, very involved in the recruitment of Miles Lockhart and Bryce West. So it's not like all the eggs are in that basket, which is, again, a lesson the Buckeyes have certainly learned in the last year. That said, Aaron Scott's recruitment is probably going to come down to where is he most comfortable? Where does he feel like he's going to fit the best? Ohio State is still the favorite at this point. So is that going to change? Maybe. I'm not going to say it's not. I'm not going to stand here. I talk to Aaron somewhat regularly, but I'm also not in a position where I can read a kid's mind and say exactly what he's thinking all the time.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering that Ohio State is scheduled to get the last official visit too, which never hurts. But then again, Jordan Marshall was scheduled to visit Ohio State 3 times and just
didn't.
To Michigan. Yeah, and didn't. But yeah, I don't think we're in like panic mode yet or anything. But the trajectory of the recruitment hasn't quite gone the way that I anticipated it go. But that's probably more my fault than anything. So.
No, I mean, it certainly hasn't gone the way anyone thought it was going to go. But again, I think it's just a change of mentality, change of perception, change of perspective. Like this is new. This is 2023 recruiting. Like it is not the same as it used to be. Even, I mean, yeah, you have the players like Garrett Stover, for example, who said, "Hey, I know exactly where I want to be. I'm done and over with." But that it's not the same for every kid. And Aaron is a very, unique kid. He's not going to be pushed by anyone else. He's interested in talking to Bryce West and other guys about their choices, but he's not compelled to follow them or, join up together. They talk about it. It'd be nice. They'd like to, but they're not going to make decisions based on that. So who knows? What else? Kingston Viamuasa, top 3 on Friday. Ohio State, Notre Dame, USC. Somewhat of a surprise, I think, for folks that USC was in there over Miami. At least in Miami, like a month ago, was sort of the perceived favorite, I guess. But no, it's Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC. What I think is really interesting, and again, we go back to that NFL draft discussion about the defensive players. I don't recall Notre Dame or USC having a whole lot of draft success either. I think Notre Dame, USC had a couple guys drafted, one corner who was a transfer and then a defensive end. But none of those 3 are playing like lights out defense at this point. So I don't think it's that way. I think it's more of an Ohio State Notre Dame battle than a USC, but the Trojans will do what they can to keep them home, I'm sure, by the time June comes around. The one thing you mentioned, final official visit, Ohio State is slated to get the last one for Kingston June 23rd through the 25th. So Buckeyes were the first team to offer him a scholarship, and he was the first offer in the Ohio State class of 2024, which is a unique relationship thing. But on the flip side, the guy that offered him that scholarship is Al Washington, who's now recruiting him at Notre Dame. So that's the way the cookie crumbles. What do you think about that recruitment? You seem like you think he's going to Notre Dame, don't you?
No, I really don't. Like I trust James Laurinaitis a lot. So I'm I feel kind of somewhat confident on that one, but I'm not really in the loop on that one as much as I am some of these others. I was going to ask, you remember when the Bengals drafted Ray Malaluga? God,
I
that
do,
was
of course.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am a huge fan of Kingston Viamuasa as an aside, as far as a player goes. I think he's just extremely underrated nationally, and I think that you put him in a trio with Garrett Stover and Peyton Pierce, that is a really, really good linebacker group for Jim Knowles if they can pull that off.
So just to reiterate, you were surprised that USC made the top 3? Is that what you were saying? You thought it would be Miami?
I thought it would be Miami up until the last couple weeks, but the conversations I'd had with people regarding his recruitment like a month ago were like, hey, kids don't want to go play in the Trojans defense, which is totally understandable. But then you look at it from the perception of, hey, he's at home. That's where he lives. So it's a little bit harder. So what else we got? I mean, there's not a lot. Guys, why don't we get, let's see. I'm going to try to answer a few questions because we're doing this live. And so why not answer a few questions? Anthony Avila says, Dylan Stewart still leading. I don't know that Ohio State was ever actually leading for Dylan Stewart. They're certainly very much in the mix. Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, when you're competing against those teams, to say you're in the lead is somewhat folly for a number of reasons. Number one, because the minute that you say that or a player says that, those schools are just going to increase whatever they're doing, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, quickly. And so then you can find yourself trailing. It's all about just making sure Ohio State has a plan for him often, as far as where he is in the defense. The glaring omission of defensive end in the 2023 class is obvious. Everyone knows it. That is a fight that's going to come down to how do you fit into the depth chart. Georgia, Alabama had pretty good years recruiting edge players a year ago. Ohio State didn't. Does that help the Buckeyes? You think it should, but we'll see in June. There's no reason to even talk about that recruitment as far as who's ahead, who's trailing. As long as the Buckeyes are in the fight, which they certainly are, then wait till June and then we'll talk about that then. I don't really care much about the RPM stuff as far as who's leading. A lot of those things are just not really relevant. Let's see. CJ Partlow, who will be the next receiver commit? That's a good question, CJ. And it's worth talking about Jeremiah McClellan from St. Louis, Christian Brothers College High School. He was another guy at Oregon this weekend. It seemed like a lot of dudes were at Oregon this weekend, just randomly showing up, making a 4,000-mile flight or whatever for a spring game that I'm sure all of them paid for by themselves. The reality is I think it will be McClellan still. I think he's the most likely to be the third guy in the class for Ohio State with Mylan Graham and Jeremiah Smith. But there are a few others. Keelan Adams, wide receiver from Virginia. Ohio State's very high on him and offered him a few weeks ago. They're still the guy that they're really, really interested in is this kid, TJ Moore, down in Florida, and Terrence Moore Jr., who maybe is the best fit, but he has not visited. Constant talk and communication between that camp and Ohio State, but the visit hasn't happened. I think Brian Hartline's supposed to visit him this week down in Florida, and I think you'll get a better sense then of is this going to happen or not, because the Buckeyes are not going to keep investing their relationship capital into a player that doesn't really seem to be interested in visiting. Andrew, what is your thought?
I think Clemson really wants that kid too, from what I've seen. But somebody on the forum earlier had posted about in-state guys for 2025, whether it's a Bo Jackson or who's the other running back from Northeast Ohio.
Marquise Davis from Cleveland Heights.
Yeah, if either of those guys or anybody in the state for the 2025 class could pop anytime soon, or is Ohio State still kind of not slow playing, but they want to get things in their ducks in a row for 24 before that.
I would think that they would like to wait until the summer for any of those things to happen. Marquise Davis would certainly be the one that's closest in my mind. He's been on campus 4 times this spring. Justin Hill, the linebacker from Winton Woods, who I think is just going to be an absolute star, is another one that I wouldn't be surprised if he's an early commit, because he seems like a kid that wants to build a class. But he's up there. So Those are the ones. Let me see. CJ Partlow again. Do you think Jordan Seaton is slipping away from us? I don't think Ohio State's getting Jordan Seaton. I don't think that they care if they get Jordan Seaton. He's down at IMG now. I would suggest if you're an Ohio State fan who is like a recruitnik, let's just take that one off your list for now. That's all I'm going to say about that. Brandon Baker. Ohio State thinks they're in it. Ohio State thinks they're in it. Cameron Souter. Buckeyes believe that they're in the fight. He's scheduled an official visit June 9th. What's interesting about Brandon Baker, Andrew would probably be better for this because I know he's more of a social media watcher than I am, but like there's a lot of times when Brandon Baker is commenting on other players' stuff with like the Ohio State with the nut icon, emoji and that sort of stuff. So I think that it's interesting to just pay attention to it. He is definitely like if you were to put a list together of who's at the top of the board for Ohio State, the wish list, Brandon Baker is priority 1. Gerby Lambert from Massachusetts would be priority 2 as far as offensive tackles in this class to add. Zone 6, any chance for Sammy Brown? Yeah, there's a chance. Not a good chance, but there's a chance. He's still saying he's going to take an official visit. You've got Georgia and Clemson as the top of the list. I don't think that he will come to Ohio State, so I don't talk a whole lot about him because Georgia and Clemson are very much. KJ Bolden, David Belichick, I don't know, probably Belichick. David, KJ Bolden is a really good player. He's not close to a decision. He's got Ohio State still in that group. I think it's Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia in the top 3. Perry Eliano will see him this week, as well as Jordan Rubel Johnson down at IMG. And he'll also head up to New Jersey and see some of the safeties up there. So it's going to be an opportunity for Ohio State to how do I best put this? If the question is, do the Buckeyes still feel like they're very much in the fight for KJ Bolden? Then the answer is yes. Does that mean anything? No, because he's not going to make a decision for a few more months. Other Elias Rudolph, Stephen Haberly. I don't know. I mean, I don't like to BS my way through this stuff. Elias Rudolph, his recruitment is sort of weird. He obviously moved down. Andrew, you got something to say? You got something to say, punk?
No. I was just going to say, like, that's a name we haven't talked about, like, at all. It seems like since his move or whatever, it seems like he's just vanished or something.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I mean, obviously, Ohio State offered him a year ago at camp in June. He moved down to Florida to Deerfield Beach, and from what I understand, it was just a family issue to move down. There's some discussion about maybe moving back for his senior year. He's been picking up offers from all of the usual suspects in the SEC over the last couple months since he's been in Florida. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where the kid's mindset is. I've talked to him somewhat recently, said that nothing has changed between him and Ohio State. He says he still talks to Larry Johnson all the time, wants to come back and visit, but didn't get up and visit in the spring. We'll see if he comes back home to Ohio in the summer. And the defensive line position just continues to be an absolute mystery. I mean, that's the simple truth. There is not a lot of what you'd consider clear-cut answers on the defensive line, and there hasn't been for a while. So I don't know what this means. Why are you using a Notre Dame football on this video's thumbnail? It's not a Notre Dame football, RR. It is a Rivals Camp Series MVP football, a golden football that Aaron Scott won at the Rivals Camp Series last Sunday in Cincinnati. All right. I don't know. I don't have anything else, Andrew. I think we talked about a lot here. So I don't know who Jalen Key is. Who's Jalen Key? Is that the kid from UAB? Oh,
was that the kid who just put out a list of like a portal entry, who put a top list out and Ohio State was on it? Maybe
from Alabama and Birmingham, I think. That's not a real thing. Don't worry about that for Ohio State. That's not happening. They simply do not have any more room in the secondary at this point. So do not, cool kid. I appreciate the question, but no, there's not a lot of room for Ohio State to play around in the secondary at this point as they sort out the roster, try to get down to 85 by August 1st. Zone 6 says that Key just put it in for exposure. I would say that's probably right. Ohio State is oftentimes put onto lists that they don't actually have any reason to be on because people use them for clout. Dirty little secret. Andrew, anything else before we dip for the evening?
Nope. I think that's about it.
Well, folks, we appreciate you watching. Appreciate you joining us on the lives chat. Tyler, Carrisley, we did talk about Dylan Stewart. Nothing's changed. Ohio State's in the fight. So there's no leader. There's no good, bad, or otherwise. We'll keep going here. And hopefully we'll get back with another episode of this. My goal is to do one live episode a week, folks. We're going to try to work that out as we head into the summer months. It's, recruiting picks up while the rest of the stuff slows down. So we'll do our best. Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please join us if you're interested at ohiostate.rivals.com. You can use promo code DTE30 to sign up for a free 30-day subscription to join us on the message boards where we talk about this stuff all through the day. And on YouTube, subscribe, turn on your notifications. There's like a little bell, I guess, like a little bell. So then when we do go live or when we do post new videos on the podcast, that you get an alert to say, hey, by the way, there's a new video on the podcast. So that's it. So again, thanks for watching, folks. We will see you on the flip side. Bye.